Sheriff Matt Kendall, good afternoon. Thank you for joining me.
Good afternoon, Keely. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
No complaints.
Good. Well, Sheriff, you are my hometown sheriff from Mendocino County. Last year, when I came out to film a documentary on a murder in Humboldt County, kind of on the Mendocino Humboldt line, so you had some involvement in it. You were very generous. You showed us around, and since a lot's been going on in Mendocino, I was hoping to get your perspective on some of the wild and woolly misadventures of the North State.
Well, since we talked, um, we've had a couple of homicides, kind of a major shootout between some drug trafficking organization type folks in our marijuana grows. We had two in a day. Three people were shot in the Hulls Valley area. One of them did not make it. The other two have survived. And then we had one that was kind of up Bell Springs towards Island Mountain in that area up there. And
Yeah.
so black market is alive and well in Mendocino County. And, in the past, anytime that the price of marijuana began to dip out, we would begin to see more violence associated with it because it's like anything else. When everybody's making money hand over fist, usually people get along. But when times get tight, that's when people go at each other.
And that's what you're seeing right now.
Absolutely.
Why do you think the
And,
price is dipping?
well, the price is dipping because we've had this massive overproduction in the state of California. And a lot of people who tried to get legal, the hoops that they had to jump through, the taxation, it was like all of the cards were stacked against the legal growers. And then at the exact same time, the illegal growers, they removed any real penalties or any real teeth from the law. And so it created kind of this two-class system where if you're trying to get legal, we're going to regulate and tax you out of existence. And then if you're not going to try to get legal, there's not really any teeth in the law with the exception of a citation and a $500 fine. So what would be easiest at that point? So the good people who are trying to be legal and whatnot, they start letting it go out the back door and not paying taxes on it, not honoring their licenses and permits. And then the bad guys, well, they just kind of really went wild with it and created this massive number of plants and whatnot, which drove the price down.
Okay, I see. This is all very familiar, but most of my listeners aren't from Northern California. What is the Emerald Triangle? Why are we talking about cannabis in Mendocino County?
So the Emerald Triangle consists of Humboldt, Trinity, and Mendocino counties. And after that back to the land movement in the 1970s, we had a lot of people show up here who started growing a little pot behind the house. And, we had some mom and pop pot growers who started making money on the illegal market. And these were not evil people. They were, kind of hippie kids who wanted to go back to the land. But then it became big business. It became really big business to the point where our county thrived for 35 or 40 years on illegal marijuana. And then after the Compassionate Use Act of 1996, that codified, I think it was 11366.5, medical marijuana. All the lawyers got involved, and every case that we went to do, there was some medical claim, and some of the claims were just absolutely ridiculous. Some 19-year-old guy with leg cramps gets a prescription to grow 500 plants. I'm sorry, that's laughable. But then we saw this huge explosion of illegal marijuana going, and it got to the point where it used to be that they would plant marijuana in locations where you had to look for it. It was hidden under manzanita and oaks and in the brush. Then all of a sudden, the new idea was the cops can only get so many plants in a year. If we plant this marijuana in several locations and our marijuana fields are huge, they won't be able to get them all. It became a numbers game where we used to see 200 plants in a large marijuana grower, maybe up to 1,000. All of a sudden, I remember we got 7,000 plants. It looked like a vineyard. I was just amazed at it. But now we're running into 25,000 plants. We're running into 30,000 plants in a grow. And on an operation like that, We are tied up all day, sometimes 2, 3 days. We just can't get it rooted out. And then with little to no teeth and laws, oftentimes we will go cut down 10, 12, 20,000 plants, and you drive by the place the next day and they are replanting.
So it was kind of a byproduct of the hippie movement and the back to the land movement, and then it became a destination and a reason to move to Mendocino County because this was like part of the culture, basically, was cannabis production. Is that how you'd say it evolved?
Absolutely. And our
Okay.
land prices went through the roof
Yeah.
during the time. Um, our grow supply stores, our hardware stores in the out of the way areas that were thriving because people were coming in and buying soil, post hole diggers, fencing material, everything that they needed. And so a lot of our businesses were just, they were killing it. It was, it was a boom. There were so many people showing up. Small businesses that should support, at the most 4 or 5 people. Suddenly there was like 22 people working at small feed stores. You guys were up in Harris at one point.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about the Harris store. Oh my goodness, they couldn't keep groceries on the shelves. It was,
Yeah.
it was like a swarm of people that came to Mendocino and Humboldt County.
That's died down a little bit, I would say. I mean, do you think
Mhm.
it's changed? Yeah. With legalization or what made
Yeah.
it? Okay. So legalization
Leg-
had an impact.
Well, it had an impact. It drove the prices down because there was so much overproduction in the state of California. And years ago, I think it was 2020, I met with the state up in Trinity County with the guru for the Department of Cannabis Control. And I asked her, has the state done any looking into what is the consumption of the state of California? And the answer was no. The question is why? Well, because if we produce more than what we consume, then we know that we're just building a healthy black market. Because, I mean, it's like the ABC laws, the alcoholic beverage control laws. They don't ever want to put too many stores selling liquor and things like that into a neighborhood. You don't want to have oversaturation because you create alcoholism, you create all these different issues. And
Yeah.
if we would have looked a little differently at things and said, what if we have farms that will produce exactly what the state can consume, and then we get rid of the black market, the bad guys out of there? I think that they would have flourished. But I think that what we were looking at was a time when the politicians were hoping to make everyone happy, which in itself is a recipe for disaster.
This is what it seems like to me. It seems like after legalization, there was a big shift. A lot of people got out of the market, but some of the really bad actors entrenched and stayed. And it's not just California's market, there's an international market for cannabis. So it seems like you have almost more of the really, really bad guys operating in Northern California because they still have this international market that they're providing to. Is that fair?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And the Silk Road had already been built. And now we have international markets in China. We have international markets in the United Kingdom and Ireland, where that if we can get Mendocino marijuana there, it is very, very valuable. And it's almost like the opium poppies in Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, they weren't really worth anything, but if they could get them to the United States and Mexico, where opium was acetylized, then you had heroin, and that's when
Okay.
the value began to blow up in the United States and whatnot.
Right. So, whenever I go anywhere else other than Mendocino County and I talk about how I grew up, maybe you've had this experience too. It's like deer in the headlights. Like people, I didn't really know how bizarre it was to grow up in the middle of cannabis country because it's not just weed, it's also ranches and agriculture and logging for a long time. So it's this very rural agricultural area with a huge, it's like half hippies, half cowboys. And describing growing up like that, where all your neighbors grow pot, the guidance counselor, a lot of the people that work at your high school, it's just part of the culture. How would you describe growing up in a place like Mendo and how that impacts your town?
Well, you have to remember, I am several decades older than you. And when I was a kid growing up, there wasn't very much pot around. There just wasn't.
Okay.
There's a lot of alcohol and whatnot that we all raised hell, and we go shoulder tap some old fella and he'd go get us a six pack of beer. But we didn't have much of it. And then all of a sudden, after that Compassionate Use Act of 1996, I began to see just this massive explosion of marijuana grows, and everybody was seeming to get into it. And it didn't matter whether you were a real estate agent or a guy who sold cars, a fellow who worked at the sawmill or drove a logging truck. Everybody was planting 25 plants behind the house. We could see it from the air. I mean, it just blew up everywhere. And then all of a sudden, people started to make a little money off of it, and we began to experience home invasion robberies. I never saw a home invasion robbery when I was a young man, but this began taking hold because more and more people were showing up and committing robberies against people that they did not think would pick up the phone and call the police. When I was a young fella and I worked narcotics in my mid 20s, I never had any concerns that some crook would figure out I was a cop and he was going to meet me at the intersection of walk and don't walk. I did have concerns that some crook knew that I was standing at the intersection of walk and don't walk with $5,000 in a bag. That just invites robbery. And, if I played my role right, they didn't believe that I was going to call the cops because, I'm sorry, I was out trying to score methamphetamine or cocaine at the time. And they knew that I was not going to pick up the phone and call the cops and say, I just got robbed of $5,000 because I was attempting to get into a drug deal. Nobody does that.
That kind of contributes to, which we talk about in that documentary, that like culture of silence. You don't talk to the cops. You don't, I mean, I remember as a kid, people going door to door, like, my house got robbed. Did you see anything? And they didn't want to call the police. And you know why they don't want to call the police. They don't want
Yeah,
to
because
invite police.
they were up to something that shouldn't have been up to.
Right. These homicides, that's a byproduct too of this culture where there's a lot more violence. I've met kids in New Jersey, LA, San Francisco who come to Mendocino to trim bud for the summer, and they may not realize how dangerous that is. What kind of murder cases do you see, and what's kind of a common thread between some of them?
The common thread is always greed. And we do have human trafficking absolutely in our marijuana grows. We found a young lady who was, I believe she was 16 years old, didn't speak English, and had no clue where she was in a marijuana grow in Covelo. Luckily, we hit the place within a day of her arriving, but the cartels have controlled the border for the last several years. Nobody got across the border without paying the cartels. And so if they couldn't pay, a lot of these cartels, the drug trafficking organizations that got people across the border, the people who came across, they came with a debt to them. And so they were farmed out to work in locations that substandard living conditions, pretty inhumane workload. Nobody got paid. It was just one of those things. We have seen homicides where we had arguments by the bosses and they got into it. We've seen homicides. We had a 19, 20-year-old boy who was murdered and then laid out alongside the Cobble Road. He had Mexican money in his pockets and the holsters for a trimming shear on him. And I still don't understand how someone or why someone would do that, but sometimes it is to continue with control inside of your organization. If somebody steps out of line, they have to be made an example of. And the issues that it has brought for my county are beyond the capabilities of what we normally have with manpower and personnel because it's just been a flood of these folks.
Yeah, right. How big is like the area that you're covering, and how many officers do you have to cover that area?
Well, right now I'm down in personnel numbers by roughly 25%, and I've got 3,500 square miles. And so normally I have two on the coast, two up north, and two in the Ukiah area. And so with six people, I've got to cover 3,500 square miles, which is, almost 600 square miles per deputy. The other thing is we had a fire up in Covelo several years ago, around 2020 or 2021, and all of a sudden the cell towers quit working. And come to find out, Covelo, I believe that the census, I can't remember what the last census said we had, 2,500, 3,000 people or something, but some massive number of people, like 4,000 people, tried to dial 911 at the same time, and everything shut down. I spoke with the store owners up there, the man who runs the grocery store and the people who run the gas station and whatnot, and I asked him, excuse me, based on toilet paper, light bulbs, paper towels, how many people do we actually have living in Colo? His estimation was 7 to 9,000 people, based on he knows what he needs to, service a community, based on the number of people that are in it. And his thought was 7 to 9,000 people out of a location where it was supposed to have 2,500.
Whoa. So that's a lot of people that you don't know about living out there.
And if we don't have those census numbers, it but we don't get the federal funding and state funding, because a lot of it is based on our census. And when you have, let's say that Round Valley is 66% unreported, because we have these people who are doing illegal things up there and not telling us that they're there. I'm handling calls for service like you would not believe in there, at a location that should not create that many calls for service based on the number of people who are living there. And so it's the numbers are not correct, and therefore all of the issues that come from the numbers not being correct are another issue.
Wow. Covelo it's a town in the Round Valley Indian Reservation, so that's a factor. This is a Native American reservation. Seems like they attract a lot of drug trafficking organizations because of the perception of diminished law enforcement on res land.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you talk about how Covelo's changed since you were a kid, and what the natives out there are experiencing, what they're saying to you? What's life like in Covelo right now?
Round Valley has become an extremely dangerous place, and when I was a kid growing up, it was probably one of the safest places on earth. Um, we would take off when we were kids, little kids. We had bicycles. As we got into our, 10, 12, 14 years old, we had horses, and we'd ride down to the river. We'd go all over the place. We all had permission to cross the neighbors' lands and whatnot. They always gave us permission, close the gates, make sure you don't let my cattle out and whatnot. There was never any issue. When I was, heck, 14, 15 years old, I was allowed by my parents to ride my horse all the way from Covelo over to Island Mountain. Um, didn't bother them. There was nothing evil going on at that time. But now, kids are indoors because of the dangerous situations. We've had drive-by shootings. We've had takeover robberies, home invasion robberies. We've had homicides. We have so many missing people up there. It's just amazing. But when you think about it, we always start off in a deficit, because a lot of our missing persons, they're involved in things that you don't call your wife and say, well, I'm heading to, you tell her when you're heading to the grocery store, you're coming home from work, but you don't call and say, I'm going to make a 100-pound weed deal. You don't do that. You don't call and say, I'm meeting two guys on the Covelo Road and we're going to purchase fentanyl, methamphetamine, or heroin. Those are things that you keep secret. And so when somebody goes missing, they haven't left a trail with their family, with their friends, talking about where they're going and what they're doing, because you don't discuss it. Um, we've had crimes of violence that I just can't wrap my head around. And I mean, we had a body that was found in a car. We have a suspect in that, and the suspect has fled to Mexico. Um, we've got all kinds of things like that going on every year. And a lot of these cases, they're so cold by the time that we get to them that the suspects fled, and then we're dealing with forensics and whatnot to revive the case, make our case for us. And by the time that we actually get on the hunt for the person that we want, they've had 10 days to 2 weeks head start.
Yeah, and you're dealing with a town of 2,500, 3,000 known people, but there's actually closer to what, 9,000. So
Yeah.
that's tough to solve a crime in a situation like that. What is the federal response to this up to now has been a lot of interest in the fact that you have cartels operating on Native American reservations in the United States. Is that changing at all with the new administration?
It is changing. We've had a lot of violence in Round Valley, and on the Round Valley and Indian tribes. I've gotten phone calls, letters, calls at home from people saying, please come up and deal with this. This is getting so out of control. We hear gunshots all night. Let's see here. Yeah, Covolo's census says that there's 1,495 people there.
Oh, wow.
That's really off.
Yeah, wow.
I get a lot of these phone calls, and they're from the issue is I've got to stop and think about, is this person tribal or is it non-tribal? When they're people you grow up with, you don't know if they're natives or not. They're just your friends. And a lot of people will call me on the phone, and a lot of our natives don't live on the reservation. They live on family land or allotments that came from the tribe back in the 1920s, things like that.
Yeah.
And so you don't realize who's native and who's not. But we are to the point where we're beginning to see just tons of non-natives growing marijuana on native lands. I spoke with a friend who quietly explained to me exactly what was happening. He had been approached years ago by a drug trafficking organization saying, hey, just let us set up our grow in your property in the back there. If anybody shows up, you tell them it's yours, it's legal, but you don't have to do anything. We're just going to give you, I think at the time it was like $8,000 per cycle. And they had several hoop houses that they would set up. He turned them down. I know a lot of people who did not turn them down. They said, yeah, you can use my land back there, just grow. And it's not the natives that are growing. They're getting money for allowing people to grow. But it is absolutely drug trafficking organizations who are just setting up and then handing them some money, hoping that, the tribe will put some protections in so that the sheriff cannot go and interrupt their work.
And they're doing that. You're getting sued right now by the tribal council. Can you talk about that lawsuit? I don't know what you're allowed to say, but you're right now facing a lawsuit from Round Valley Indian Tribal Council for these marijuana raids.
And it's based on the Cabazon decision that basically says if something is regulated by the state of California, the tribe has a right to regulate it. Okay, and I understand that, and I think that they should. Tribes can regulate hunting and fishing because hunting and fishing is legal in the state of California. It's simply regulated. You have to do it during the season. And I think that the tribe should absolutely be allowed to do that. But when you have over 1 million marijuana plants standing, it is not tribal members who are growing and, doing these things. It is causing violence. And I have tribal members that are calling me, telling me, please deal with this. I think that they can make the argument that it's being regulated, but I don't see how it's being regulated.
Yeah, right. You're from Covolo. This is your community, so you know a lot of people there. One of the attorneys for this lawsuit, whose name escapes me right now, he said in an interview in Law 360 that you're a racist, and that's why you're going after grows on Native American reservations. What would you say to that?
I'd say that's absolute bullshit, and it's a lie. My daughter's a native. My brother's children are natives. I don't hate my family. I grew up there. I know the people there. They are the people who are calling me. And when you've got to turn to tactics like that, chances are you don't have much of a case.
I agree that's bullshit, but yeah, I think that context is helpful that you grew up here and so you're getting phone calls on your cell phone. You're not just getting phone calls to the sheriff's office from people who are asking you for help. Can you talk about water? You've got a water issue out there too, right? You were just telling me about that the other day.
We were having a heck of a water issue all over the place, but now the tribe is, I believe, turning off the water to residents at certain times of the day because they're having so much trouble recharging. And if you look at even just the Google Earth photos, there is so much marijuana being grown that I don't know how they can sustain with the amount of water that they have that needs to serve the tribal homes.
Wow. So they're shutting water off because they're running out of water. So much water is going to these grow sites.
Yes, and if you look on some of the Facebook posts, a lot of the folks who live on the reservation are getting really tired of it. I think I shared some of that with you that was shared with me. But people are getting tired of it because some people are making a lot of money on it. But when you can't even turn on the water to cook your supper or bathe your children, is it worth it?
I've been interviewing people up there since this all happened, trying to get some more information about how natives feel about it. people who live in the community feel about it. None of them will go on the record. They're all anonymous. They're happy to talk, but they are scared
Yeah.
because these are cartels that you're dealing with. Their neighbors are cartel members. So they're scared, but they do want to talk. And everyone I've spoken to so far feels that this lawsuit doesn't represent the community. You have to deal with different tribal councils. In the past, some councils have been much more pro law enforcement, right?
Yes, and the tribal council kind of runs hot and cold at times, but most of my life, the tribal councils want law and order, and they want peaceful locations where their children can play. And when you go out to the reservation, it's like any other neighborhood. If you didn't realize that you're on the reservation, you wouldn't know you're on a reservation. There's play structures and parks, and the kids go out and play, and the kids are riding horses and having fun. All the stuff that we did. And that doesn't happen so much anymore because we've got dogs that run loose and attack people. We've got all of these different things that are just kind of a byproduct of this lawless society. Parents are really concerned about, and the sheriff is actually compelled. I am compelled. I am forced to enforce the laws on tribal communities. California is a public law 280 state where the federal government basically stepped away from their responsibilities and put it on the sheriff. And so in public law 280 states, I can enforce all state laws. I can't enforce federal law because I'm not a fed, and I can't enforce county codes. And so the county codes regarding leash laws, regarding all of these things with animal control, they don't apply on a reservation. Can I share my screen with you? Is that a
Yeah.
possible?
Yeah.
Can you see this?
Yeah. So this is
Okay,
like
so
in Google Earth.
yeah, this is like a Google Earth. And when you look at this, this is
I know what those
our
are.
tribal community.
Wow. Those
So
are all hoop houses, huh?
yeah, look at the number of homes versus the number of hoop houses. So there's a home there, and all of these are grow sites. There's a home there, and all of these are grow sites. Grow sites, grow sites, grow sites. So from the looks of things, it looks like grow sites greatly outnumber the number of homes.
That's wild.
Isn't that something else? And then look up here. And some of these, they are on and off the reservation because, you know, there has been
Well, the land's kind
different,
of checkerboarded, right? Because you've got some
yeah, the
family.
reservation is checkerboarded because everything in Round Valley is within the original boundaries of the reservation. But some of the natives sold their property years ago and it just became county property. But when you look at this, think about every plant here. I think that the average, someone was saying years ago, I read a paper on it or something, that the average marijuana plant over its lifespan will consume an average of 6 gallons of water per day. When you have 1 million marijuana plants, how much water is that?
Wow. And we've got
Yeah.
water issues in Mendo. Wow, that how close is that to Main Street?
As the crow flies from there to Main Street, 1 mile.
Okay, so that's almost right in the middle of town where kids are and all that stuff.
Well, that's the middle of the housing there, reservation
Wow.
housing. And then when you look out further, it's everywhere. It's not just on the tribe. And when we served the search warrants last year during July, there were only a few that were actually on the tribal lands. Everything else was on just standard county land that people own.
So
So,
that's a factor in this lawsuit too. You're not even dealing with tribal land on most of these.
yeah,
Okay, interesting.
it raises this interesting question. And I do think it's a question that needs to be answered. If something is regulated, the tribes should be able to do their own regulation on it. But when you look at things that are regulated, fentanyl is regulated, right? But that does not mean that you can go out on the street corner and sell fentanyl. That's a completely different story. There's also portions of marijuana that are regulated, but there are portions of marijuana that are just flat illegal, and you may not do it. You may not do it if you have previous felonies. You may not do it if you're a convicted sex registrant. There are these things that make it just a no, no, no. And so some of that's been kind of ignored in this as well. I think that we'll get some clarity on it, and I think that we need some clarity on it.
Yeah, definitely. I just found this study. So there was a 2024 study just last year, UC Berkeley, found that in some Humboldt and Mendocino County watersheds, cannabis water demands constitute about 10% of total supply during dry months. And all of that, nearly all of that, is going to illegal grow sites, not legal.
Yes.
So, yeah, and then in a Siskiyou County report in Cal Matters a few years ago, they estimated illegal marijuana growers were consuming 2 million gallons of water a day. So this is a huge factor. It's not just like a small issue when we talk about California water. It's really a big deal. And I've known a lot of people who, you go out in your river or creek and you find a PVC pipe leading into the woods. Or I've been hunting, I'm taking horses to horse camp up in Hall Mountain, and you just stumble across a grow site in the middle of national forest land, and they have a really sophisticated drip system. So they're trucking in illegal water to fuel that grow site, and it's not just a small amount.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think natives, how do they feel about the cartel moving in? What's it like for them? Do you think that this is, something that they've been ignored? Are they trying to reach out to Gavin Newsom? Are they trying to get help?
I think that their voices are often silenced because in these small communities, when people talk, sometimes punishment can come. And, the punishment is for two reasons. They're going to make things punitive for people who speak about it so that they'll stop speaking about it, but also serves as a warning to anybody else who would want to speak about it. And the people who call me always want to be anonymous. And a lot of them, they have my home phone number because they're old friends. And they will tell me, I want to speak off the record, but this is what's going on. Please come and deal with it. We're tired of the violence. We're tired of these things occurring. And the sticky wicket is I've got to look out for the residents of the county, but I also have to look out for the county cultures. And if you're spending all your money on lawsuits, how are you going to put deputies in patrol cars? That's where this really becomes an issue. And then the other thing, I do believe that the tribe should have a right to be able to say we want to do our own thing on some of these things. And as long as it's not causing problems and violence and everything else, please do it. Some of the most innovative things that we've ever seen. Years ago, my father, who was the fire captain up there, was working with the tribal council to make sure that they got a tribal clinic in there, and they do, and it's been wonderful, and they serve 100% of the population. It's been good for everyone.
Yeah, but I mean, they don't really have police right now.
No,
So, because tribal
we
police aren't just other police with a different department, they are more like security officers a lot of the time.
yes, unless they have been sworn in as a special law enforcement commission where they can send them back to the federal police academies and get them their SLEC certificates, then they don't actually have police officer powers. They can make a citizen's arrest. They can do all of these different things, but they don't have police powers. They're more like security, and they're all good guys. I mean, the tribal police departments, they hire good guys. These are good people, but they are at will employees. And if the tribal council says don't do this, then they won't do that. Don't enforce this or don't enforce that, then they won't. And they're not bad guys in the least, but they have a boss and they're doing what their boss tells them to. And if you have a tribal council that doesn't want these problems dealt with, then they won't be dealt with.
Okay. Okay. So when you say you're getting phone calls from people, that's because they don't really have the personnel. Are there any police officers who have that certificate, or any tribal police in Covelo, in Round Valley, who have that certification?
No, no, there aren't currently.
Okay. So that you're their only phone call. No one else can
Yes,
really help deal with this stuff. Wow.
no,
Have you heard from Gavin Newsom? Have you heard from Sacramento at all? They have
no,
no interest in cartels operating on Native American reservations and murdering people.
no.
Wow.
I know that Sheriff Hansel had a meeting with Department of Cannabis Control, and it was a positive meeting. I don't know what the outcome of that was. He brought up all of the concerns and issues, and he said they listened. Now, are we going to see any action out of it? We had what I thought was going to be a productive meeting in 2020. We've seen zero action out of it, and it's to the point now where I, I I hate to say it, but it just seems like it's a numbers game in the state of California. We don't have the votes up here, so they just seem to not care.
Hmm. They don't need you to win elections, so they're not going to pay any attention. That's a little ironic since, I mean, their whole thing is DEI and minority representation, and you've got a pretty impacted Native community with a very high homicide rate. Someone in interviewing people up there gave me a survey from the Round Valley High School, and one of the biggest priorities kids at Round Valley High School had was more police in Round Valley
Yes.
because they don't have anywhere to go. They don't have anywhere to be kids and be safe anymore.
Yes.
So there's just not really a connection between what the state is caring about and what's impacting these kids' lives and people's lives in tribal and rural towns in California.
Well, but that's like we were talking about earlier. Politics seems to want to whitewash over the truth at time, and when they begin changing nomenclature and they begin, using the words like farmers for drug trafficking organization growers, I'm sorry, that's not the direction that we go. When protesters are called protesters, when all of us can see that something is a riot and there's things being burned and people being injured and bricks being thrown, I'm sorry, don't call it a protest. All that you're doing is diminishing those who are actually peacefully protesting. You're lumping them in with criminals. And I don't know why the peaceful protesters are not calling them out and saying, you're going to hurt all of our causes.
Yeah,
I
and you
don't know
get
why.
that. I know. You get that in another way with you get criticism for arrests of minority groups. Can you talk about that? What's the deal with the pressure to not go after criminals?
This is something that I don't understand. There was this big push. I remember I was watching Reggie Sawyer Jones, who was, I believe he was an assemblyman. I can't remember. He was either in the Senate or the Assembly. And he made a statement one time basically saying, I'm not going to do anything that puts black or brown faces in jail. Okay, but when you think about it and you really look at this, we have very little interracial crime in the United States. Just, I don't know why, but if you are a person who lives in an African American community and you're victimized, the most of the time you're being victimized by an African American. I can tell you that when we have crimes on the tribe, probably high 90s probability that it's a tribal member who victimizes another tribal member. And so if we say we are not going to deal with people in certain races, we also have to say we don't care about the victims from those races because it's part and parcel.
Yeah.
So, it I think that some of these identity politics are hurting people at a level that the politicians they either don't understand or they don't want to hear. When we saw the recall of the district attorney in Oakland, Pamela Price, one of the big pushes was the NAACP was saying you've walked away from our victims. She was saying, but I don't want to put African Americans in jail. But if they've committed a crime, why is it any difference? If they're engaging in criminal behavior, and so everyone gets affected by that. And if we say, we aren't going to deal with a certain group of people, then whoever is in that group who's victims, we're denying them justice.
Do you think that the state is pressuring you to kind of walk away from victims?
Yes, absolutely. We have seen it over and over and over again with different bouts of legislation where the working man, the good human being who's not going out and breaking the law, is the only person who's affected by the laws. We see all of these laws being put in place regarding concealed carry permits because they think that anybody who owns a firearm is insane. Well, they haven't been to Northern California because everybody owns a firearm. But they will say, we have got to get these gun owners under control, but it's the legal gun owners that they're trying to control. My thought process behind it is let's do a survey. How many times does a legal gun owner commit a crime with a firearm versus all of these early prison releases? Let's take a look at how many times they have committed crimes. The shooting in Sacramento several years ago, that was an early release from state prison. Nobody wants to talk about that. So if you put those two I think that you'd probably have maybe a 1% with responsible firearm owners ever having a criminal action versus probably a 50 to 75% with these early releases from state prison. So if you stack those two up against each other, which one needs to change?
Right. Right. Yeah, Northern California, you just said how few officers you have for a huge, huge area, mountainous, rugged area. You can't rely on 911 in a place like that. So that's why people have guns, is you just have to protect. I mean, in high school, half the kids had a gun in the truck.
During hunting season, every kid at Round Valley High School showed up with a firearm in the gun rack of their pickup truck, be it a shotgun or a deer rifle. We never had a school shooting. We weren't allowed to take them into the school. Oh my goodness! If somebody drove up with a gun in the gun rack today, my goodness, you would think someone had taken a swing at the Pope. But in 1985, that was a very standard thing for us because when we left school, we either went to work or we went hunting.
Do you think the Back to the Land movement coincided with all these regulations on, especially logging, because that's been so diminished? I mean, we used to have a lot more industry in Mendocino, right?
We had industry everywhere in the 1980s. I think we had 4 mills at the time in Willits. The high school kids would go work at Little Lake Industries in the summertime. We just had all of this going on, but now it's been this it's been this big movement to find something that is being affected by something and then just shut it down. Um, and when you look at that, these areas that were resource driven, we have sustained yield logging practices now, but that's not good enough. There are people out there who never want a tree to be cut down. Okay, then how are we going to build a house? And when you think about it, most of our forests and the areas that we're growing timber, like it or not, fir trees do have a shelf life. They're only going to grow for so many years and then they begin to die. And if you don't harvest those, now we've had millions of acres of timber burned up because nobody is managing the forests.
Yeah.
And then we have groups that, bringing back the wolves. My goodness, next thing you know, we're going to bring back the grizzly bear. I understand that people say, oh, they were here first. Well, are we going to start, splitting genes and eventually bring back the T Rex?
I feel like California is turning into this pro predator state. So they crack down on everyone who's trying to make a living, middle class people, law abiding people. You cannot have enough regulation on those people. But then they keep chipping away at regulations against predators. They make it unpopular to send bad people to prison. And now they're introducing, four-legged predators on top of that and protecting wolves instead of protecting livestock, protecting elk, protecting deer. It's pretty backwards.
Well, the issue is that a lot of our lawmakers and our politicians, they live behind these walls in gated communities. And the people who are affected by the decisions, the people who have to suffer the outcomes of the decisions, they should be the folks who have a say at the table, but they never are. They never are. They find some way to undercut them. They find some way. I saw it very clearly with the reimagining of the criminal justice system in the state of California. The first thing that our government started doing was trying to sensationalize anything that had gone wrong in the police service and paint us with the broad brush to undermine us and undermine our community trust. And then once that was done, now we can go into these reforms that make the police the bad guys.
Yeah.
We've been seeing this for years, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Now, have we had cops who are dirtbags and bad guys? Yes, we have. And we fire those guys as soon as they show their colors. But it doesn't matter what industry you're in, you're going to have a percentage of the people that you have to deal with. You just do. That's life. However, they are working hard to paint the entire group of us, be it deputy sheriffs or police officers, with a wide brush, call us racists, call us abusers of power, this, that, the next thing. When the fact of the matter is, we got a bunch of young people who are just trying to make it home alive at the end of the day.
What are you, like fifth generation or something like that in Mendocino?
Six.
I'm sixth. Wow. So, these people in Sacramento are the ones who don't understand what's going on in our town. You're pro legalization, correct?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And my thoughts behind cannabis, and people don't realize this, but when prohibition ended, it was about 10 or 15 years before a real legal regulated industry came into play. It was. The mob was still trying to put their fingers into things. There were still politicians that were owned by liquor. And until they were rooted out, we didn't have a real good regulated industry. Why is it that the federal government has not changed the BATF into the BATFNC and regulated cannabis just like, they regulate liquor, tobacco, firearms? If they did that, they've already got the works in place for taxation for all of this. And when you think about it, we would have cannabis in Mendocino County that would be like our breweries. There's roughly 7 or 8 of them between Mendocino and Humboldt County, and they do just fine. But they aren't going to put Coors out of business, and Coors isn't going to put them out of business. But the market will regulate itself if it went legal across the United States. Some counties, if they don't want to have it, they shouldn't have it. In the same fashion that some counties don't like liquor. That should be up to the people in those communities. But as
Okay.
far as the taxation and legalization of it, if we just got to the point where people were trying to beat the tax stamp, would we have all of these issues that we have right now? I doubt it.
Why isn't it regulated federal? I mean, it's still a Schedule One drug, so it's just you think it should be federally legalized?
It should be, and the federal government is working towards reimagining it, and I believe that they're trying to move it to a Schedule 3 where it's regulated, but it's not legal, and I think that eventually we're going to get there. But, I've seen a lot of serious crimes committed by people under the influence of alcohol. The only crimes that I've ever seen committed in the cannabis world were due to the greed behind it. You don't see people murdering someone else over a bottle of liquor or a pack of cigarettes, two things that you can buy at the liquor store. And if we have someone steal liquor at the liquor store with a firearm where they hold the place up, it's a byproduct to getting the cash out of the till.
Hmm.
It just, so,
Right, right. I'm torn because growing up in Mendo, it's tough to not associate cannabis with some of the cultural impact that I've
mhm.
seen. And, you know, as a kid, it wasn't that sexy to smoke weed because our teachers grew it in the backyard. So it wasn't that exciting. It wasn't that prohibited. I don't know. Do you think there is a cultural impact cannabis has? I don't really know how I feel about it.
I think there is a cultural impact to it, but culturally, I think that I remember a time where alcoholism was huge. And when I was a young guy starting working in the jail, late 80s, early 90s, we would have 25 or 30 bookings for DUIs in a weekend. Now, if we get 6 in a weekend, that is a big number. Because people have stepped away from that. But the reason why they stepped away was Mothers Against Drug Driving, and it took the power and put it in the hands of the judge, but it also gave strict guidelines for if you're arrested for drunk driving, you're going to spend 2 days in jail. Okay, so there's an enforcement portion of it, but you're going to have to sign up for Lucky Deuce. You're going to have to attend, 4 AA meetings in a row. There was an educated piece to it. And then there was a lot of work that came out from various doctors talking about the health risks of alcoholism, things like that. And I got to tell you, when I was a kid, and my father was not a big drinker, my mother was a teetotaler, but I had a lot of buddies whose fathers were absolutely alcoholics and they didn't know it. Nobody knew it back then. It was, if you watch television shows from the 1970s, everybody went home and had 3 martinis every night. That is not normal nowadays.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I think that through education and enforcement in equal parts, we get where we're going. But you don't get anywhere without the carrot and the stick. You've got to have both. It can't just be carrot and it can't just be stick.
So you basically think we've crossed the Rubicon when it comes to cannabis. It's not going anywhere. So the government trying to half-assedly, regulate it isn't going to do the job. It's going to need
No.
to be education and talking to kids about the risks. I've heard a lot more about young people and schizophrenia and psychotic breaks related to cannabis. I know it's gotten a lot more potent since the Back to the Land days.
Oh
Are you
yeah.
seeing that in your job?
Yes, we've seen a lot of different issues with it, especially with our youth.
Mm,
So the issue for me is always, I think that parents should raise their children, the government shouldn't. And so parents need to have those conversations. Of course, there should be literature and things that are put out by the government that will be helpful, but parents need to have those discussions with their kids and they need to raise their children. That's just the way that this works. And if a kid grows up to be 25 years old and decides that they're going to smoke pot when they get home from work, by all means, you do as you please. You're an adult, and as long as you're living your life and being a productive member of society. But I am never going to advocate for anybody using tobacco, drinking beer, or smoking pot. I just don't think it's good for you.
okay. And this is all totally separate from cartels or drug trafficking organizations from China and Eastern Europe and South America, Mexico that are operating in California with total impunity because we have or had up until 5 seconds ago an open southern border. So they could just do what they wanted and send it all over the world in shipping containers. I've seen the photos of Chinese grows in Siskiyou. I know I was told last year on that doc shoot that China was winning the cartel war and they were the most prevalent. I do not think many Americans are aware of that. We talk about all these ICE raids. We're debating whether or not we should be deporting farm workers. Meanwhile, you have a very robust trafficking system from the southern border to Northern California and across the West. It's not just Northern California anymore, it's Montana, Idaho, all over the place. California is just extra easy because you're not going to meet any resistance from Sacramento. That's different. That's not about legal weed in America. This is just about lawless, insane behavior, and it's not about cannabis. I mean, a lot of these huge growers are feeding a meth habit with their cannabis grows, so they're not just smoking pot. Or at least that's been my impression. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, that's exactly correct. And the other thing is, cannabis is not worth a lot of money in Mendocino County because we have so much of it. But for years and years, we've heard about people trading pounds and pounds of weed for, pounds or kilos of cocaine, of methamphetamine, of fentanyl. That is a good trade because, at the southern border at one point in time, I think the statistic was that a fentanyl pill was worth about 55 cents, and it was worth about $50 on the Blackfoot Reservation in Brown, Montana. They could really cut a fat hog by trading marijuana for these pills, and then these pills get more people addicted. And when marijuana finally just flattens to the point where it's not worth anything, well, everybody's addicted to this now. And so we've got this emerging market.
Okay.
And these cartels are not one trick ponies. They are not. It's marijuana, it's methamphetamine, it's fentanyl, it's human trafficking, it's labor trafficking, it's sex trafficking. If they can make money in it, they've got their fingers in it. And think about some of the stuff that's going on south of the border right now. Avocados. My goodness, we're talking avocados.
Yeah.
You think the avocados are evil, but people are being murdered over avocados.
The environmental impact too, that's another piece of all this because a lot of the grows are on national forest and state land, right? So can you talk
Yes.
about that a bit? What kind of environmental impact does it have on our public land where these cartels are operating massive industrial sized grows?
So the issues are always the same thing. It's the banned pesticides and chemicals, including carbifurans, that circle of death where a, an animal comes along and eats and gets carbifurans, this insecticides, and a deer dies from it. And then a bear comes along and feeds on that deer, and then the bear dies from it.
Yeah.
It's really concerning because we're seeing these things, and then all of the plastic and the trash, and you've got to basically dam up creeks or find a spring to get the water to it. It's just ridiculous the amount of garbage that we're seeing in these locations. And I don't know how on earth we're ever going to be able to clean it up. And when you think about it, some of these grow sites that have been using these banned chemicals, what's going to happen, 2 or 3 generations when they have not broke down? It's like the Romans salting the field on the way out. Not only did I use everything, now I've kind of destroyed it for future use.
Wow.
But nobody wants to talk about that.
Wow. What kind of stuff have you seen on grow sites? Have you seen cartel paraphernalia? You've seen human trafficking?
Yes. And we've seen, it was up in Trinity County a few years ago where the cartel trucks or the DTO trucks were being tagged up like the trucks they have in Mexico, where they were spray painting, their monikers or the tags on these trucks that were out in the forest to tell the other DTOs, stay out of this area.
So they're having turf wars on
Yeah,
public land, tribal land, rural America.
exactly. Let me share a screen here. So if we go into this, garbage being burned, these huge vats where they're mixing chemicals.
Wow.
These are the types of things that we find in these grows. I mean, that's out in the middle of nowhere. See all that plastic and all these tubs and everything? That's where they were, basically filling the tubs using the grow soil that they brought in. Let's see here. Metamorphos, it's written in Spanish. That is a banned chemical in the United States. We've got all of these types of things that we're constantly running into. And then when they run from us, 99% of the time they're armed. We've just
Oof.
got some pretty serious concerns about what's happening in our rural areas, and not enough people deal with them.
I was talking to some people in Round Valley who said they have a lot of kids that show up to the high school that are trafficking victims working on the grow sites. I know you speak Spanish, so you've probably spoken to these victims.
A lot of what happens is we have these kids who show up who are the children of migrant workers, basically, and we know they smell like weed when they show up. We know that they're not living in the best of conditions. A lot of times the parents are sending them to school because they want to be good parents. There's no two ways about that, but also they're fed. There's people who wind up in some pretty crummy predicaments simply because they owe a debt to the drug trafficking organizations. And we know that it's going on. Getting a kid to talk about it, it is not going to happen. They love their mom, they love their dad, and they are not going to cause problems for their families.
Of course. So they're working for cartels because that's who got them across the border, and now they have a debt they owe these people.
Yeah.
So they find themselves on these grow sites, forced to work.
Yeah.
Wow. Do they know what's happening? Do they know where they are when you find them?
A lot of times people will not know where they are when we find them, but after they're in the community for a while, they begin to figure it out. It's usually the grows that we find out in the forest and things like that, where we'll run across people. And, I spoke with a young man and said, what on earth are you doing here? Well, they brought me up here to Washington because they told me I was going to be cutting down pine trees. Well, you're not logging and you're not in Washington. But then you get a little deeper into the conversation and they say, well, people show up about every other week and they bring us food and they're going to pay me this much at the end of the year. But I didn't know I was coming up here to grow marijuana. I was just told. And then a lot of times at the end of that year, nobody gets paid. They just say, okay, thank you very much. And if they drop them someplace near a town, hey, great. If they don't, they got to walk out of there. They got to find their way. And that's the type of thing that happens when people aren't making money any longer. More people and more people get exploited every day.
Do you think some of those people just disappear? They get disappeared out there because nobody wants to pay them or deal with them?
Yeah, I'm sure that it's happened. Um, we've heard some stories about, people who have been disappeared. We've got that missing person that we've been working on from Covelo for several years now. And I don't know that we will ever find that person. It's such a rural area. Plus, you could just step off the side of any road, dig a hole, and unless nobody knows where to dig, you aren't going to find it. We've got a lot of those issues.
And you don't even know who's living there. So someone could go missing and not be missed.
Yes.
Wow. Have you ever, and you've told me some stories, but you've been shot at a couple times, mostly in Round Valley?
A couple of different places. I walked into a grow out by Underpass Road, and the guy got a round off at me with a 12 gauge. I was walking down the road in the middle of the night in Round Valley. walked past a girl, and I think the guy maybe thought I don't believe that he thought I was a cop. Guy skipped a bunch of 45 rounds down the road at me. Things like that go on because maybe he thought I was just walking down the road at midnight to rob him. I'm not exactly sure what he was thinking, and then that guy ran, and I was never able to catch up with him. These are the things that happen when you're a policeman up here too.
Wow. You took us up there, our doc crew. So if people want to watch short doc, it's called High Country Murder. It's on the murder of a rancher in Humboldt County. So it was Billy Hansel's case, but you kind of showed us to give the audience an understanding of the area. You took us up to Round Valley. We rolled up in a big windowless grip van. I'm sure that wasn't your favorite sight. We got to
Yeah,
ride
that
in the
probably
truck with
raised
you. The
some
guys were in
eyebrows.
the van. What's that?
That probably raised some eyebrows.
Rolling into town. Well, I remember, so you took us up there. We spent a few hours. You showed us some of the sites. We flew a drone. There was a point where you were always watching all around. I didn't really know what to look for, but you took good care of us out there, which was generous of you. I'm sure flying a drone in Round Valley, we weren't making friends, but I remember there was a truck that rolled up that you were pretty worried about. And by the time we left town, you told us we'd been followed for quite a
Oh
while,
yeah,
which
that,
I hadn't
that vehicle
noticed.
followed us for about an hour. They wanted to know what we were up to.
Did you ever hear anything from that or
No, I
another
made
day
a
in Round
couple.
Valley?
I made a couple of phone calls, and it was people that were nervous that we were there to rob them. Windowless van and a drone, and people thought that, oh, are they reconning my grow site? And that's why people were following us around.
Oh,
At least that's what my buddy tells me, and he's never lied to me so far.
yeah, you've got pretty good sources in Buffalo.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's also a shot of a big burned out building with some women's faces painted on it. Those are all missing and murdered Indigenous women from Round Valley. I believe all of their cases are unsolved. No, at least one of them is solved, but Khadijah
One
Britton's is
myself.
unsolved.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just a tough place right now. And you mentioned dogs earlier. I've worked on a ranch out of Covelo up at Lone Pine, where all the cattle's ears are torn because they deal with these packs of wild dogs. Which can you talk about that? Where are these dogs coming from?
Those dogs are coming from grow sites, and what they're using them for is, they get a few dogs and they feed those dogs, and the dogs provide, basically alarm service for them. Somebody comes walking in or something, the dog's going to bark. But at the end of the year, they just drive off and leave the dogs. These were, like pound puppies to begin with, and they don't have any love for them, with the exception of, we need you to make noise. And so when they stop feeding them, then they wind up, going down into that long valley where the Heller Ranch was, or they wind up going down to Lone Pine. And when you think about it, which is easier to catch, a young calf or a fawn? The
Mm.
dogs begin eating cattle. And if you have one dog, you have a pet. If you have three dogs, you have a pack. And the pack mentality occurs, and they're all hungry. Next thing you know, they're attacking livestock. They're doing things that they shouldn't do. And, that area up at Lone Pine, so the old Witter Ranch, Dean Witter's ranch, you had Lone Pine and you had the horse ranch. I worked out there when I was a teenager. Um, it is kind of really in the heart of that Island Mountain, um, Emerald Triangle. You got Long Valley just beyond it. It was kind of an epicenter for large marijuana grows, large illegal marijuana grows. And people who had ranches and horses and stuff up there, they were finding that, young horses and ponies were being killed by these dogs. And sometimes these packs, they got up to six or eight, sometimes as big as 10. And they'd gone feral. They were just surviving.
Another thing ranchers have to deal with, because that's a lot of the folks who interact the most with black market growers, whether they be drug trafficking organization growers or what have you. They're often the ones interacting because they deal with so much wilderness, open land, whatever. They're often
Yes.
running grazing leases on national forest lands, so they might run into a grow site. They're dealing with a lot of these water problems. Ranchers often have water stolen or cattle stolen by these drug trafficking organizations. I think that's happening more and more all across the West, not just in Northern California. Anything else to kind of explain to people how ranchers are and why ranchers are first in line when it comes to dealing with the black market cannabis problem?
Well, the issue is that there is a fight for space, there is a fight for land, there is a fight for water. If you have when I was young, it was nothing to drive around and see these old watering troughs that were hooked up to a spring. And, you'd see a piece of black plastic pipe where some rancher in the 1920s had developed a spring, and a dribble of water would constantly go into that watering trough. Well, around the 1980s or 1990s, all of a sudden, watering troughs were going dry, and then the rancher would go look, and somebody had diverted that spring, and it went to another location where they were growing marijuana. And so, a buddy of mine up outside of Garberville said that he went over and fixed it like two or three times, but the third time, fourth time he went up there, something like that, he walks up to look at it, and there is a pipe bomb laying there. And that was a warning to him, quit messing with my water source. It's no longer yours. The rancher's water source had been diverted, and he was given a very stern warning, do not mess with this because what I've got is worth more than what you've got. And those are the types of things that we run into. We went through that drought here in Northern California, and I think it was 8 or 10 years. We had one heck of a drought. And it really made residents angry that they can't water their lawn, but their neighbor can have 5,000 marijuana plants. I mean, it's the have and have not. And with the teeth being pulled out of the law, what do you do at that point? Go give them their $500 ticket, chop down all their stuff, and then the neighbors, they're angry about it and they'll secretly talk to you, but they sure as heck are not going to talk about the fact that, you know, this guy's got guns, he's got some pretty shady people hanging around with him. They get concerned over it.
Yeah, yeah. We, in that case, if people haven't watched it, High Country Murder Recovering, murder of an 85-year-old rancher named Richard Drury, was found shot outside his ranch. And there's still no one charged in that case, but the family recently named who they think is responsible. In my opinion, it had to do with water, just based on everything we found and we shared, and you can make your own decision. But to me, it looked like a dispute with a neighbor over water. So that's something that's just going to keep happening. I just interviewed last week a gal up in Siskiyou County, talk about the Klamath Dam removals, how water has become a huge issue. I talked to someone out near Island Mountain named Jenny, a cowgirl out there. She said people are going to start murdering each other over water. It's already happening. So that's a huge concern, and definitely an underreported factor of our water wars is illegal cannabis, especially by cartels.
Yes. And everybody talks about all the issues that we've had over oil over the years. Okay, and I understand that because the price of oil is important. But we have a lot of emerging alternatives to oil. We do. And eventually, we're going to find something that works better than oil, is cleaner than oil. Eventually, we will if there's a need to. However, there is nothing on earth that replaces water. I mean, you either have it or you don't. There is no alternative to it. I mean, of course, we can start desalination projects and stuff like that out in our oceans. That is a technology that will serve the coasts, but not the interior and not the inland.
Yeah.
There is nothing but water that is water. And so if there's no alternative, what will wars be fought over?
Right. Yeah, and especially in California where we don't need to have a drought, it's a political decision, as Edward Ring talks about. It's a political decision for us to have a water shortage or an issue because we don't have to.
Yeah, well, we don't have a water problem in Northern California. We have a water storage problem, but it's become this great big political battle where people want to, clutch their pearls and talk about things that we become an all or nothing society, and we become a society where you either have to win or you have to lose. And that's not the way that things should be, but we see that with our political parties as well. And it doesn't matter whether you're insane left or insane right. There's probably 2% on both sides of that spectrum, but 96% of us are in the middle. And if you aren't insane left or insane right, you're a political orphan. And that makes absolutely no sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's over stuff that shouldn't be controversial, like water or not having cartels, you know, sending trafficking victims to your local high school, stuff like that. Pretty basic, like human rights, human interest. And it doesn't seem to me like just a California Democrat problem. It just seems like it's a one party problem. When you have so much power on one side, that's when you get all this corruption. Just too many people thinking the same way, not having to answer to anyone. They'll get elected because they have the letter by their name that people want to see.
Yeah. But then the parties also control them. You will vote down party lines, or we will make sure that you don't get our nomination and you don't get our funds and you don't get. I mean, the parties are controlling these people,
Yeah.
and very good people on both parties. There are. I know a lot of Republicans that I think are really good quality human beings. I know a lot of Democrats that I think are really good quality human beings, but they all need to have a backbone and say, I'm sorry, I'm going to stand up for this because this is what is right and this is what is wrong. But when they have those, you're going to vote down the party lines, they begin weighing out what their future is.
Hmm.
And I think it's sick and it's perverse that the party should be able to control the people.
Yeah. Gavin Newsom is right now, he's talking about ICE raids and all this stuff. He's making a big issue out of it. And that's hard to hear coming from a guy who just doesn't listen to any sheriffs in Northern California or poorer California or agricultural California. You are right in the middle of two of the biggest issues that the Trump administration has targeted. Number one, water, because of the LA fires. Trump has highlighted California's water insanity in our issues. He's just kind of pointed to how asinine it is. In 2014, we voted to create more water storage. Gavin Newsom has used money from the bond that we voted in as citizens of California to create more water storage. He's used it to tear down dams. He's continuing to do that. And then Trump is also obviously making a huge aspect of his presidency shutting down the border and removing illegal aliens, criminal illegal aliens, especially people who are actively operating on criminal enterprises inside the country. So you're
Yes,
kind of central to two of the top headlines right now.
absolutely. And I've had conversations because of the issues on the tribe. I have conversations with the federal government through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And I believe that I should be talking to the BIA because these are things that affect the tribe. And the BIA, we've got one BIA agent for the entire state of California who is a darn good guy. He is. He's been very clear with me. Since the administration changed, they're much more concerned with making things safer. And so we'll see where that goes. But I think that there's a lot of people who just are unwilling to say what's best for the people versus what's best for the party.
Well, one of the biggest undercovered stories from the last election was, and I still don't hear anyone talking about this, 64% of Native Americans voted for Trump.
Yeah. Well, but you have to remember that a lot of times they are in areas where they're completely underserved. But the reason why they're completely underserved, like Round Valley, is because of the masses of regulations that have been put in that have taken out jobs, that have taken out industry. When I was a kid growing up, it didn't matter who you were, Native, Irish, Italian, all of us had work. And if it wasn't cattle ranching, then it was logging or sawmilling. Everybody was working up there. And it doesn't make a difference what nationality you are, what your heritage is. Everybody wants the same thing. They want safe streets, safe communities. They want to be able to go to a job that gives their family something extra. But, the Democrats for years and years have handed out a lot of money. And sometimes I truly believe it's like a Disneyland dad thing. We're going to make poor decisions, but we'll hand you money that'll make you happy. But nobody should be raised on government assistance. And I don't think that, and I'm not saying that because government assistance is bad. I think that people who raise a family on government assistance, that family's got a crummy life. They do, because it gives them just enough money to keep them in the ditch. Why aren't we working as a nation to create more education, more opportunities, and more accountability? If we have those three things, and here we are in the state of California that seems to struggle the most with those three things. Education, California struggles with. We can all see the reports on it. Northern California, I think, does much better than Southern California just because our numbers are smaller, right? But opportunities, every opportunity that we have in these communities that are resource driven has been killed.
Yeah.
I mean, just the amount of, when I was a young fella, the timber harvest permits, they looked like a hymnal in the church, and now they look like a King James Bible. And if you go out to do a timber harvest, you better show up with 2 accountants and 3 lawyers. My goodness. What does that run the bill up to? Look at the price of housing due to overregulation. And, they say, oh, it's climate change. Well, when you haven't managed the forest in years, and when you have people who will not let you cut the brush because of CEQA, what do you think is going to happen? And they say, oh, we're going to take it back to a natural state. Well, let's be clear here. If there was a natural state, we wouldn't have all these houses screwed into the brush. And chances are we'd have a lot more grazing animals. We'd have a lot more of what we used to see in Mendocino County. But now that paradigm has shifted. And because we're not managing the forest, and people think, well, we shouldn't, ever cut down trees. Well, I'm sorry. Fir trees are slow growing corn. You cut them down and then you plant them, and then, the next generations. It's agriculture. It just is. It's called forestry because it happens in the forest, but it's agriculture. And when we don't manage those and we watch millions of acres of timber burn up, what would have been better? Should we have harvested some of that? And maybe we would have lost a hell of a lot less? Nobody thinks about that because everybody thinks that there has to be a winner and a loser. And when you get over to Sacramento, nobody's interested in hearing what the opposing party says. They're more interested in winning the argument.
You make a really interesting point that Mendocino used to have all of this industry, all of these jobs. Round Valley Reservation used to have all of this industry, all of these jobs that have been erased. And we keep getting told right now Americans don't want to do those jobs. That's why we have to import and exploit people from third world countries. There was a report today about this meatpacking plant that got raided by ICE. Told over and over, Americans don't want to work in meatpacking. Used to be a great middle class job, secure, lifelong job. They had a waiting room filled with people this morning applying to fill those empty positions, American citizens applying to fill those jobs. So we're just told that we should be regulated out of existence, rely on the government, import people to do these jobs for us because we don't want to do them. I don't believe that's true.
Well, what blows me away about it is when I was young, I knew and still know a lot of people who own a very nice home in Mendocino County that they were able to buy working in a sawmill. Okay? That's just the way that it was. If you were a logger or a sawmiller, if you worked in one of these industries, you were going to be fine. You could afford a home. You could raise your family. Nowadays, I think that a lot of this labor is getting exploited because the concerns that some people have, and let's be very clear, a lot of these folks who are not legally here, they get taken advantage of because of the fact that they are not legally here. And so jobs that should be paying $25 an hour are now paying 14. And that is hurting and affecting everyone, and it sure as hell isn't good for them either. We've done some of these things that we probably, if everybody stepped back and really took a good hard look at, it's not serving us, it's not serving our neighbors, it's not serving our families. For me, I never look at whether a person is here documented or undocumented. I look at good guy, bad guy, right? If it's a good guy, hey, not my business, I don't care. If it's a bad guy, yeah, it's absolutely my business. But we should not have our hands tied from speaking to the federal government when we have a rapist, when we have a murderer, when we have some of these marijuana grows up here where they're using human trafficking. We should not have our hands tied. We should all be working together on this.
Oh, are you not allowed to work with ICE as a California law enforcement officer?
Yes, yes, and
I forgot about that.
there are certain portions of that Senate Bill 54 where I can talk to ICE, but it's got to fall into one of those super felonies. When the fact of the matter is, we have people who are up to really bad things that are not covered under SB 54. And those are the people who are going to continue to victimize the exact same communities that we're saying that these are the most important to protect.
When you get together with other California sheriffs, Is there a lot of consensus? Do you guys talk about a lot of this stuff? Or
Yes.
do you have a ton of diversity of opinion on this, or are people pretty aligned?
No, we're pretty aligned because our only concern is public safety. And so the question is not being able to talk to your federal partners, does it make it safer or does it make it less safe? And then the other issue, of course, is we live in the United States where there's two things you can't tell us to do. You can't stop our speech and you can't compel our speech. And so when they say, oh, you can't talk to the federal government, well, I'm sorry, are you impeding on my freedom of speech at that point? And let's face it, Sacramento doesn't think that our law enforcement leaders should be consulted on anything. We recently had a state sheriff's association meeting where we all get together and we work with all of our partners and we meet with all of our partners. And it doesn't matter whether it's Department of State hospitals or our partners from the Office of Emergency Services, things like that. We have a meeting every year where we meet with all of them, and then we get a new president every year. We swore in a new president, and he won his $20 bet that after 1 year, he will not have been able to have an audience with the governor.
The
That's the
president
president of
of
58 California sheriffs, and they don't think it's important to have any conversations with law enforcement leaders about public safety. They want to talk to academia. They don't want to talk to law enforcement leaders. And it's like getting a barista and telling him or her, you're going to fly this jumbo jet, but you're not allowed to talk to the pilots. Go ahead and load up 300 people, see how far you make it. So he's taking all of his cues from these folks in academia who say, well, this should work or that should work. But when you won't speak with law enforcement leaders, is it going to work? And it's
wow.
just a refusal. It is just a refusal because I don't want to hear what the other side has to say because I don't have to. I have one party control.
This isn't politics for you. You're just saying that practically these are tools you need and resources you need to serve your community and keep them safe.
Yes, and the office of sheriff is nonpartisan.
Right. Right.
So my party, it it has absolutely nothing to do with my office.
Yeah.
The issue that I see is when they refuse to have these conversations, they just won't, things are not going to work out in the fashion that they should.
Yeah. Yeah. You dealt with that during COVID. It was pretty free to be in Mendocino County with you as sheriff during COVID. Wasn't half bad compared to where I was living in Southern California.
Well, the issue is during COVID and things like that, they would put out these orders from the governor, and believe it or not, those orders, they were directing the Office of Emergency Services, not sheriffs and not police officers. But what's going on here is they say, oh, you can't do this and you can't do that. Okay, here's the next question. When they come out with an order right before Thanksgiving, do they truly expect I'm going to go through and do a head count? Who is over at your house at Thanksgiving? I am not going to do that. And at the same time, they're turning state prisoners loose hand over fist, but they want me to go out and do a head count over who's at grandma's house for Thanksgiving. I'm sorry, you guys are turning state prisoners loose. I have got a handful of problems just with the parolees and whatnot that were suddenly thrust out onto the street. And you want it to direct me to go over and deal with decent law abiding citizens because they say you can't go to grandma's for Thanksgiving?
I have a friend who's a cop, and he just told me the other day, he's in Orange County. He was saying there is a new regulation in California where sex offenders no longer have to stay out of a certain zone around schools. He ran into
That,
this
that,
trying to get a guy, a level three sex offender, away from a school, and he was told that doesn't apply anymore. They can be around schools. This is a new thing from the California. Is that true?
well, there's tiering that they're doing, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to tier some of these people out. But what most people don't realize is these things were put in place not for public safety. When Prop 47 was pushed through, I think it was billed as the Safe Schools and Streets Act. It had nothing to do with safe schools and streets. It was a scheme to release state prison inmates. And the hard part is all of this money was coming in from the closures of state prisons and whatnot, and that money was funneled off to NGOs, and that money buys votes. That's what it does. We're going to come up with this new reimagined plan, but nobody wanted to talk to the sheriffs or the police chiefs about it because we would have told them this is ridiculous. You are not creating public safety. And if you want to drain state prisons, education, opportunities, and accountability, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
But that's the long road. Nobody wants to take the long road when you have one party rule.
What was Prop 47? Which one was that?
That was I think it was put through in 2014, and it reclassified a whole bunch of state prison crimes so that they will now be housed in county jails. And it didn't take into account this person's body of work. It took into account his last crime. So if he was a rapist, a child abuser, a murderer, but his last crime was stealing a car, well, you go to county jail. And it filled our county jails with state prison style inmates that are so much more sophisticated. It also legalized a whole bunch of drugs. And now everybody's saying, wow, we have this mental health issue in the state of California. We're at a crisis level because narcotics and methamphetamine and cocaine, all of these things have gone unchecked for over a decade. Do you think it's really good for our population that they ingest all of these drugs and they're going to walk away scot-free without mental issues? And then we get into these arguments with academia where they say, well, it's a chicken or the egg question. Did they have mental health issues and they were medicating themselves and that's why they're messed up on drugs? When you grow up in a small county like this and you know everybody that's been coming to jail for the last 35, almost 40 years, like me, I knew a lot of guys that were as right as rain when they were young and then they got into the drugs and they are no longer right.
Yeah.
So it's like I read these papers and these studies and whatnot. Who am I going to believe? Am I going to believe them or my lying eyes that I've watched this digression over the last almost 4 decades?
So just to clarify, is that a new thing that sex offenders, and that's because of the classification they're trying to continue to classify
Retiering,
offenders? Yeah. Okay. So that's, who does that serve? Do you less protection for kids in schools? Like, how
that
does that?
serves to drain state prison populations. That's
Wow.
what it serves. It serves to drain state prison populations.
Okay, so they're trying to have more lenience for child sex offend. Okay. I
Yeah.
mean, pro predator. That's all that that is. They're just pro predator, anti citizen on every single front. It's absolutely insane.
Well, and we had that great big argument over in Sacramento when they were trying to make selling a child for sex a serious felony that was strikeable and went to state prison. I don't know if you watched that play out where Senator Groves brought that forward and Reggie Sawyer Jones killed it in the Public Safety Committee, and it was such a black eye that the governor had to step in and tell him, "You guys need to rethink this one." Because it was this massive black eye, and I think that was 2 or 3 years ago, and then it came back up this year, and they wanted to make it so that it's got to be, a certain age limit. But we have these people who are being sold at age 16 to 18, and so they don't count, and they're still a child.
It's sickening. I know one of the Round Valley people I talked to, they talked about there was this kid that showed up at Round Valley High School, and through conversations, building trust with this kid, they realized he was being sex trafficked on a grow site, and one of the tribal council members just went above and beyond and got him out, bought him a plane ticket to get him out of there. But I mean, again, you're just leaving all of this public service in the hands of rural communities with low resources, low personnel, low staffing. You are the first line of defense, the only line of defense, and Gavin Newsom won't meet with any of you. If you could say anything to California, to the country, to the federal government right now, what would be your message as a California sheriff?
All of these folks are getting paid to do a job, and that job is for the people, it is not for the parties. And so we should expect that people will begin fixing instead of fighting. And if everybody sat down at a table and we took away all of the party affiliations and they served their conscience and the public they work for, do you think things would start getting done? And that's where we've got to get. We've got to get beyond this and say we're going to do the right thing for our people and do the right thing for our nation. But all of this infighting that we've got going on right now, It's ridiculous because nobody can get anything done, and it's like these guys are fiddling while Rome burns. It's just wrong. And you know, if you take that barista and put her at the helm of a 747 or some other jumbo jet, before she takes off, maybe she should have a conversation with the pilots. I think that would be a good start for a lot of our legislators, but they're not willing to listen. The governor is not willing to listen. They don't want to hear it because that gets in the way of, you know, things that they have promised that, I'm sorry, those promises just did not come to fruition. And when you look at Round Valley, you were there. Does it look like we're doing well there?
No, it looks like a hellscape. It's
Yeah.
apocalyptic. But Gavin Newsom has political ambitions, and you're just trying to serve your community. So you have very different goals in mind.
Yeah. Well, and you know, one of the things that I want to do, I've got a missing persons case that I want to finish, and I want to be able to deal with that. Her grandfather is a good friend of mine, someone that I've always looked up to my entire life, and I need to get that one taken care of. Not that they are all important, but this one is extra special. Um, and I also want to get Round Valley cleaned up. It's the only place on earth that I go, and every time that I drive into the valley, that feels like home. Everybody that I run into, I've known them my entire life. We can pick up the conversation where it stopped. Maybe we haven't spoken in 4 years, and we pick up the conversation right where it ended. I want to get it cleaned up, and I want to get it back to where it used to be. But some of these things that are going on in politics and in legislation, it's not helpful, it's hindering.
I saw that when I was with you in Round Valley and driving around. You knew everyone. I remember there was a guy in a black ski mask driving in the middle of the day, beautiful sunny day in May, and he was hauling a water tank, up to no good, and he knew you and you knew him, and he pulled over to have a conversation with you. That's
Yeah.
what it looks like to know a place and to serve it in impossible circumstances, and I just think it's unforgivable that Gavin Newsom has never spoken with you about the challenges you're facing in Mendocino County. What's the name of the young lady who's missing?
Khadijah Britton
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, I mentioned her earlier.
grew up with parents, and that's going to be a tough one. And, you know, we're still working hard to get information every single day. And every phone call, everything that we get, we put a detective on it immediately. Um, we reached out to the BIA. The BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, has given us detectives, and they've come, looked over our stuff, worked with us. And I asked them, see if you can find a hole in anything that we've done. So far, they haven't, but we're willing to accept that help. And everybody that BIA has sent up to us has been good, professional law enforcement personnel, just good people. And I know that they're invested in this as well.
Is the FBI involved in that case?
Yes. But, you know, our federal partners on this, we got permission to work with the FBI, but our federal partners on this, for the most part, are BIA, and BIA works with FBI as well as us. And so I just, every single night, I say a little prayer that we can get that one solved. You know, her grandfather's getting older. I want to do this while he's still with us.
Khadijah was how old when she went missing?
I believe she was 22, 23, right in there,
Okay.
right about my daughter's age.
Have you named a suspect in the Khadijah case?
We have a person of interest,
Okay.
and we believe that we know what happened. We haven't been able to find her body.
If people have tips or information, call the
Please
Mendocino
reach
County.
out to us. Now, I've worked at cases that were 18 years old, and someone grew up, found the Almighty, and decided to call us and tell us what happened. One of the issues that we have dealing with some of the things on the tribe is people don't want to call the cops. You know, it's that mentality of we're not cop callers, and sometimes people will say, "I don't want to be a snitch." Well, how did that word get put into play if you're looking out for your community? I mean, that's just an evil word. People should be allowed to talk to the police. People should be allowed to say what they saw, but you get into these small rural communities, and you know, I'm certain that I'm absolutely certain that this is not unique to Mendocino County. I would imagine the rural communities in Appalachia are the same way. People are pretty tight-lipped because they got to live with their neighbors when things are done.
Yeah. Yeah. Khadija was a member of the Round Valley Indian tribe, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mentioned her earlier, but a real tragedy in Mendocino County. Well, Sheriff, anything else you want to add? Anything I forgot to ask you or that you want to say?
No, we'll get through this. When you think about the marijuana industry in Mendocino County, it was probably about a 40, 50-year boom, but every boom has a bust. And think about the Rust Belt and coal country. That's what we're seeing here. And we've got to look for something new in the future. And we've got to get industry because when people go to work, people feel better. When people can earn what they have, they feel better. But when the government shuts down everything that you're doing and says, well, we're going to give you pennies on the dollar for what you used to have, that depresses that. And nobody wants to live on a government dole. Nobody wants to. Everybody wants to earn. Everybody wants to have what the neighbors have. Little kids, they just want to have what the other little kids have, and they want to have a safe community to grow up in.
A lot of interest in regulating loggers and protecting the spotted owl, but they don't have a lot of interest in regulating foreign drug trafficking organizations from Bulgaria and China and South America operating on American public land, American soil, trafficking people, murdering people, creating a drug that they ship all over the world in shipping containers off our coast. So tough situation you're in, but you're a great leader who really cares about your community. So thank you, sir, for your time and for what you do for Mendocino County.
You take good care and keep preaching the good word about how we're going to get California safe again.
Amen.